the founder and executive director of Journey to Self Inc., J2S, which is a Georgia based nonprofit focused on promoting healing and enlightening and empowering our communities of color. Our Please Ask campaign is a community engagement campaign focused on bringing awareness to childhood sexual abuse while also creating safe spaces for healing conversations along the way. It is my hope, y'all, that after this campaign, people in children's lives feel equipped to please ask kids about sexual abuse. This session's guest speaker features the resilient and returning Alba. We are so happy to be focusing on the offender with her today, also known as the abuser. But before we start, please know that some of the information you hear throughout this campaign may be triggering. So if you and or someone you know has experienced sexual abuse, please do not hesitate to reach out to the National Sexual Abuse Hotline. Their phone number is 1-800-656-4673. Hey, Ava, how are you?
Hello again.
Yes.
I feel like at this point we can skip introductions, but let's not.
Just in case we have someone new, right?
My name is Alba, and I am a resilient trauma survivor turned thriver, and now I am supporting other individuals overcome their trauma as a trauma liberation coach, a transformational speaker, as well as an author.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction and for just everything that you're bringing to this campaign. I will go ahead and dive right in. So, of course, as you know, we're focusing on the offender today. So, Ava, when you hear that term or that label, what thoughts or characteristics come to mind?
Okay. So that's a very, very good question. And I think that it's important to, I guess I'll use a term that is somewhat new and kind of like a fad to try to illustrate some of these characteristics in a way that makes sense. So oftentimes, so people have heard the term narcissism probably tossed around one too many times, right? And I do think that some of the narcissistic traits can really be used to illustrate some of the ways that offenders are characterized or present themselves in a way that just kind of fits, right? Yeah. Not to say every offender is a narcissist, not at all, just kind of using that term and some of the character traits of that to be able to explain some of the character traits. So one thing is that there's this idea that offenders are individuals who look and are creepy, right?
Right.
So I just want to say that it can be, right?
Right.
But most cases it's not. Most cases, these individuals are very charming. These individuals are very, they know how to speak to groups or to individuals in order to make themselves not seem suspicious, right? Mm-hmm. So in those cases, I'd say that it's kind of the opposite of what you would think of someone who's creepy and just kind of like out there with like a bag of candy trying to like somehow lure people into this creepy van, right?
Yeah.
It's not typically that. It's typically just an average person who really uses that charm and manipulate that charm to manipulate and to deceive individuals, right? So that's one of the characteristics that I've noticed. And then there's like a lot of like what you would consider like grooming. And grooming is kind of similar to that love bombing phase in narcissism, where someone is making you feel special, making you feel like, you know, this is our little secret connection, you know, it's me and you against the world type of thing. So oftentimes there's that component in that, which can make it difficult for a person who then becomes a victim, because it oftentimes takes time for after the grooming phase for a person to actually act on it. So it creates this confusion, right? Because it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is the person that really, really liked me. And this was
Right.
our little bond and connection. And now, mind you, this happens for sometimes months or years before the person even acts on that, which creates again part of that confusion and the difficulty with speaking up and like really kind of turning that person in, right? Because it's like
Right.
you create this loving connection with that person. It's like, how
Mm,
can you betray that person? How can you betray your love for that person by telling your secret, right?
right.
So it's important to understand that there's some kind of love bombing or grooming phase that typically goes on along
Mm,
with the charm that makes it very unique in how they kind of plan their attack oftentimes.
right.
Um, and what I would say too is that deep down, an offender from at least, and now this is me putting myself in that person's shoes and really trying
Yeah.
to really understand more, and I can kind of go into that a little bit more, like how oftentimes survivors and offenders have um
Yeah.
similar
That
kind of
was
core.
actually
Yep.
right. A point I
So
wanted to hit. Yeah.
yeah, so for example, I would say that that person deep down really feels insecure,
Mm,
and really doesn't, it feels powerless, right? And
right.
that's part of the reason why they use children or abuse children,
Mm,
because they don't feel like they could handle adult kind of uh interactions in a way that they, you know what I mean? It's just there's this powerlessness, and like
right.
then it gives you power over. And again, going back to that narcissism. So narcissism is to have power over, and deep down, even though a narcissist is very egocentric,
Mm-hmm.
they really lack that self-love. And because they lack that self-love, they feel the need to have power over individuals, right? So
Right.
if you can think of even the height difference between an adult and a child,
Right.
automatically creates somewhat of a power dynamic, that makes it easier for someone who feels powerless to manipulate and to kind of gain that sense of power, that sense of control. um,
Right.
so that's
Mm,
one of the things that I've kind of noticed, is that when actually faced with an adult, that
right.
person can really have a difficult time kind of maneuvering through that challenge, because they're so used to having power over someone who is less than or smaller than or
Right.
easier to
Wow, that
manipulate.
makes sense.
Um, so
Mm,
that's another characteristic as well. And I would just say that deep down, the person is hurting, right? Because there's this term that we pass around oftentimes, and it's hurt people. So it is that from that level of deep despair and that deep hurt, that they're
mm-hmm.
able to hurt other individuals as a way of a shared relative pain, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I know that we'll go into other things in this topic,
Yeah.
because we have, that relate to that shared pain, that shared struggle. But I think that
Right.
deep down, another thing to recognize and to realize is that aside from the abuser or the offender being powerless and wanting to
Right.
have power over, right, is
Mm-hmm.
that this person is actually really in a lot of pain. And
Right.
therefore, they're able to inflict pain on others in a way that it doesn't affect them as much.
Yeah. That's actually something I had to, come to terms with, especially as I was trying to set the groundwork for the overall feel of day three, as it relates to focusing on the offender. And I wanted to um, just make it very clear, that healing has to happen for offenders too, in order for us to see childhood sexual abuse actually come to an end. I truly believe that abusers have to go on some type of healing journey, some type of self awareness, self love journey, in order to stop spreading that pain, as you were stating. And so, taking all of that into consideration, especially all the things you just shared, do you think there's some type of correlation between an offender possibly being a survivor, like of a past sexual abuse experience? Do you think there's any type of correlation?
Um, so I want to say there's plenty of statistics that show that individuals who are abused are oftentimes abused.
Yeah.
And I think that from a scientific perspective or from a data perspective, the answer is yes, there
Mhm.
is a correlation. Now, is there an exact correlation, meaning every person who's abused becomes an
Right.
abuser? Absolutely not.
No. Yeah.
Um, there is just a higher likelihood,
Yeah.
right? That the chances are now higher. Um, so I would say the answer from a scientific perspective is yes. And now coming from a spiritual and kind of a relatively like from a lived experience perspective,
Right.
I would also say yes. And part of the reason why I say yes is because, for example,
Mhm.
once a child is sexually abused, their
Yeah.
mind is now open and aware to this what I don't even know how to call it, but this, let's just say this sexual
Right.
right?
Right. This new
Um,
energy.
this new
This new
energy, right?
right.
This new
Yeah.
energy, this new way of relating
Yeah.
to other people, right?
Right.
What that often does is it opens the door to
Mhm.
now experiment with other children
Yeah.
in that same way, right?
Right.
So
Right.
it is very common for a child that's been abused to go and experiment with another child. I live that.
Yeah.
I
Likewise.
personally experienced that, right? And what
Yeah.
happens is, whether it's through playing house or whether it's through, you know, you're the patient and I'm the nurse and I'm going to take care of you or
Right.
whatever it is, right?
Mhm.
There ends up being some kind of inappropriate touch, and this inappropriate touch feels good from a physiological response level, right?
Right.
So it makes sense why that would be repeated, even though there's shame connected to it.
Right.
So
Wow.
oftentimes when an adult that was a survivor of sexual trauma
Mhm.
is able to come to that realization like, wow, I was abused, because oftentimes they don't realize that they were abused,
Right.
right?
Right.
There was something that Oprah said, and I don't agree with this
Mhm.
comment 100%, right? I have
Yeah.
my own thoughts about Oprah, but anyways, she had said something along the lines like, if the abuser is really good, then you won't even know that you were abused. And there's
Wow.
some truth in that statement. Like I said, I don't agree with
Yeah.
how she said it or all the details around it. But what goes to say is that if an abuser um, grooms the child and charms
Right.
the child in a way that makes a person feel like this is an extension of love, this is an extension of the way we express love,
Right.
then it's a lot more difficult for a child to like recognize that this new thing is
Yeah.
something that's not normal, or that's
Mm.
it's inappropriate, or that it's not okay, that it's abuse,
Right.
right?
Mm.
So in that, it's easy for then that child to go and spread that to somebody else and to experiment with somebody else. So, like, let's say fast forward to 20 years later, the person realized that they were actually sexually abused by this person,
Right.
with no name, right? No name
Yeah.
and no gender, right? Because it could be a male,
Right.
it could be a female.
Yep.
So, was abused by this person, but now they're faced with having to also reconcile with the fact that they too had done things with other children
Right.
of the
Right.
same or a different, right? It could have been younger, it could have been older, it could have been the same,
Yeah.
but they actively participated in that, meaning they consented and did that in a way that it wasn't like they were coerced into doing that,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
So then in that case, they're left with the question like, am I an abuser?
Mm.
Did I violate or manipulate my cousin, my neighbor, my friend, my classmate, whatever.
Right.
That one night that we were in the closet and we were playing whatever game, right? Because
Right.
we call it all kinds of games.
Right.
Um, and
Mm.
that is one of the ways that I was able to acknowledge and kind of really put myself in the abuser's shoes and say, wow, that really, it made me feel such a high level of guilt and
Yeah.
shame because I don't know how that person who was on the receiving end received
Mm.
that, how that affected their psyche, how it, that, you
Right.
know, and was that the
Oh,
first time that they experienced something like that? Was I the one
right.
who
Oh,
opened them up
wow.
to this world, right? So it creates this trickle effect
Yeah.
thoughts that is all deeply rooted in that common denominator between survivors and abusers alike, which
Right.
is rooted in guilt and shame.
Mm.
So, and I have a term for that. Like I call it like almost like there's a virus. So it's
Right.
like there was a person that was the original carrier of the virus. Like, mind you,
Mhm.
was it hereditary? Was it, you don't know how that person,
Right.
or whether
Mm.
it was just something that that person, somehow contracted, right? So we
Right.
don't know if it
Right.
was something that from their family or from, something that they experienced that they
Yeah.
got exposed to this, or
Mm.
whether it was something that just started with them, right?
Right.
Regardless of whichever, or um, now they're passing it on to a child, a minor.
Mm.
So now that minor is now exposed, right? The mind is now
Right.
opened, and now you have this new energy.
Yeah.
And now that person goes on and exposes it to another child of the same sex,
Right.
or same,
Right.
let's not same sex, same age, let's say, passes
Right.
it to another child of the same age. And now
Mm.
that child is now contaminated, and now they
Right.
go and pass it on to their sibling.
Mm.
And then that one goes and pass it on to their cousin. And then even sometimes there's groups of people and they have this
Right.
game that they share together. It's like they're all cousins and they all share in this
Right.
common game, right? And they're
Mm.
all passing this virus back and forth with each other. The challenge with that is that the individuals who indirectly receive the virus, not from the original, carrier of the virus, are
Right.
now left with that same level of like kind of open awareness and
Yeah.
the shame and guilt that goes along with that, because
Mm.
they're doing something that's wrong, right? If they get caught
Right.
doing it, it's wrong, it's bad. So they're seen as they feel like a bad child. They feel like they're doing something wrong. So there's this shame and guilt there,
Yeah.
but they don't really have anything to blame that shame and guilt on or an actual name to describe that, right? So for
Right.
example,
Mm.
that person could go on to have the same symptoms as somebody who was sexually abused. Let's say I was not sexually abused as an adult. I'm making an example. I was
Yeah.
not sexually abused by an adult, but there was a little girl who came over
Mhm.
my house and we were friends and we played this game.
Right.
And every Friday she would come over and we would play this game. We would play this game.
Yeah.
We would play this game. Right.
Mm.
And now I become an adult and I now identify as a lesbian
Right.
because ever since I was a child, I experimented and had these sexual, encounters,
Right.
however mild or extreme, what does matter? The details
Yeah.
don't matter. I now identify as a lesbian. I
Mm.
identify as a lesbian as a result of my early, like, development, kind of
Right. Right. Mm.
all of that happened, right? So
Yeah.
it affects a person's identity. It affects how a
So
person
true.
interacts with others. It affects people in a very core way, but yet they don't
Mhm.
have a name for that, or kind of like, so if you go, like, am I going to go to therapy? I wasn't actually molested, right?
Right.
I wasn't
Mm.
actually raped. Like, there's no actual name for it.
Right.
And because there's no
Wow.
actual name for it, it's almost like, what do I need to heal from?
Right. Oh,
So
wow.
you don't
Wow.
heal from something that you don't have an identity or have the ability to identify as an issue in the first place.
Right. Right.
So if you
Ooh,
can't identify the the cause, you can't isolate the virus,
right.
then there's nothing to seek treatment for. So then you go on the rest of your life with that level of guilt and shame and confusion
Mm-hmm.
that now interferes with how you relate to individuals as an adult.
Right.
So
Ooh,
the same thing could happen with the opposite sex, right?
right.
So like let's say I had this friend and we would just play and we would play house and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So now because during my developmental ages I was exposed to this, so now as an adult I'm hypersexual and promiscuous because this is something
Right.
that from a young age I learned the the loop of like pleasure, guilt, shame, more pleasure, guilt, shame, more pleasure, and kind of
Right.
was
Oh,
on that loop
wow.
and it feels
Yeah.
familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So I can easily get the the kind of remedy to ease the pain by giving myself access
Right.
to that instant gratification, that pleasure in a way that my body is the sacrifice to give me this euphoric effect in the same
Right.
way that a drug would give somebody a numbing or euphoric effect to
Yeah.
forget about the pain, and then the guilt and shame comes back again. So oftentimes
Mhm.
individuals who have sex addiction would
Right.
exhibit this cycle of guilt, shame, pleasure, and so on. There is no exact correlation, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
something that's highly spoken of
Yeah.
because we oftentimes create this divide. Survivors are survivors and abusers are abusers.
Right. Yeah.
And you cannot put them in the same room. You cannot even begin to create um, a conversation about
Right.
it in a way that you're able to have that level of empathy that is
Mm-hmm.
required in order for you to truly have that grace
Yeah.
and have that healing that's
Mm.
necessary. Because oftentimes survivors are left with that confusion and that guilt like, am I too an abuser? Right.
Right. Right. Ooh.
So it's like, I don't want to look at myself in the mirror. I don't want to be in front of somebody who is an abuser, quote unquote, right? And then now
Right.
I'm left looking at myself.
Mm.
So let me just avoid that altogether and just identify as solely a survivor and
Right.
ignore the reality that comes with, again, that increase of knowledge, that access to that sexual energy or whatever you call it,
Right. Right.
that now created a domino effect or a snowball effect, right? Let's just
Right.
ignore the snowball. Let's just
Mm.
ignore that. And let's just only focus on the fact that I was abused.
Yeah.
So you're only healing a part of you.
Right. Right.
You're not actually liberating yourself from that guilt and shame that comes with being the person who offended somebody,
Mm.
right?
Right.
So I think that that is also part of the reason why there's like a certain level of avoidance when it
Right.
comes to survivors and abusers alike, right? And then it's important to also take into account that when it comes to healing and
Mm-hmm.
actually breaking, it's like, do we want children to continue to be abused? Do we want
Right.
um things to just never end? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, okay, let's say my grandmother was sexually abused, and then my
Yeah.
mother was sexually abused, and then I was sexually abused. Like, do we want this to continue in our family
Right.
bloodline?
Mm,
And if we don't, then how is it that we actually break the chain? It's
right.
not by healing the survivor, it's by healing the offender.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
if you don't heal the offender is going to find another person to take the place of that survivor that is now healed.
Very
So you're
true.
actually not doing anything
Very true.
to actually end the sexual abuse against children.
Right.
So I think that in order to truly end the cycle of sexual abuse,
Yeah.
we have to be willing to have the conversation about healing survivors and abusers alike.
Right. Right.
And it can't be pointing fingers.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be, well, I'm better than you, right? It can't be that. It
Yeah.
has to come from a level of empathy and shared humanity where
Mhm.
we can recognize that there's some similarities here. We both carry this level of shame and guilt, and we both don't want to live in
Yeah.
bondage anymore.
Mm.
Now, does every survivor want to heal? Probably not.
Right. Because it is not easy. You have to, woo.
But and likely, does every offender want
Right.
to heal? Probably not,
Probably not.
right? You'll have those people in your family that just want to play victim all day, every day, right? They
Yeah.
want to tell you, oh, poor me. Oh, this is going on in my life and that is going, everybody's out to get me. Like, yeah, you'll have
Right.
those people
Yeah.
not doing anything about it.
Mm.
Never had a day in therapy, never had a day writing in a journal, never did nothing.
Right.
Woe is me. Feel bad for me.
Yeah.
Give me. Right?
Mm.
And then you'll have individuals who are abusers that simply want to continue to manipulate and deceive
Yeah.
in a way that is not actually, like, you're not ready
Right.
to have the
Mm.
conversation. You don't want it, right?
Right.
But
Wow.
if we don't even try and just assume that every survivor is a victim that's just like, woe is me, and just kind of complains and never wants to do anything, then
Right.
there wouldn't be organizations like you. There wouldn't be individuals like I
Yeah.
who are
Yeah.
here to help them, right? And
True.
if we see offenders as individuals that there's no hope for them,
Right.
that they're just going to find someone else to abuse,
Mm.
then there won't be organizations out there to support them in the healing journey.
Yeah.
And we're not actually doing anything to stop the abuse from happening. So we
So
have to be
true.
willing to have
Right.
a conversation. We have to be willing to understand that there's a shared reality here.
Yeah.
And the shared reality is we're a lot more alike than we think we are,
Yeah. That
whether
part.
we want to admit it or not.
Mm.
And once we
Right.
realize that, we're able to actually move the needle forward
Yeah.
and make a difference.
Wow. I agree 1000% with literally everything that you shared. And honestly, this next question, we somewhat spoke on it a little bit earlier. I stated how healing for the offender must also take place. And I'm just wondering, Abba, how can one begin? Like, what could liberation, just in your opinion, for an offender look like? If someone was watching this video right now, and they're like ready to heal, but how from an
Mm.
offender's perspective? Is it counseling? Is it first acknowledging, coming to terms?
I don't think it's any different than the healing of that of a survivor.
Yeah.
And it's really recognizing that the cycle
Right.
and the bondage
Yeah.
it's not the life. Like, it's almost like life's got to be better than this.
Right. Right.
I remember when I would just continue to kind of, the way I would see it is, it's like I'm driving with my foot on the gas,
Yeah.
running from my past, right? Just driving fast, right?
Right.
About to crash
Mm,
for like the 500th time of my life, right?
right.
And because I'm running so fast and don't want to look back, don't want to acknowledge, don't want to address, don't want to, I'm just going to go, right?
Right. Right.
So at some point, when you hit that one crash and then the second crash, you notice that there's a pattern here, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
like when you
Yeah.
get exhausted of continuously reaching that same wall,
Yeah.
crashing yet again, and you
Mm,
realize, I don't want to continue to live my life this way.
right.
So it's that realization that I don't want to continue to live my life this way that is that spark of hope.
Mm,
That's all that's needed, is a spark of hope,
right.
and God will do the rest. Like, it will all work itself out.
Right.
But you just have to have this desire to no longer live in
Mm,
bondage, to no longer continue to have these repeated cycles of
yep.
avoidance, these repeated cycles of shame and guilt that only
Right.
leads to further depression, further despair, further hopelessness. And once you have that spark of hope, because like I said, it's just the spark. That's all you need. It's
Right.
just a spark.
Right. Mm,
And having that spark, whether you're a survivor or an offender, it's all that you need
yeah.
for you to want to, instead of going left, let me try going right this time.
Yeah.
Because I've gone left
Mm,
so many times, and each time I go left, something bad happens.
right.
Each
Right.
time I go left, I get caught up in something. Each
Yeah.
time I go left, so let me try going right this time. And not to say that the right is the right way, right? Right?
Right.
Opposite, doesn't matter. But now when you go right, you feel this sense of joy.
Yeah.
You feel this sense of peace. You feel this sense of calm.
Mm,
And that's all you need
right.
for you to, next time you're at the fork, you're going to choose right again,
Yeah.
because it's bringing you closer to peace, closer to joy,
Hmm.
closer to that sense of calm. Now, the challenge that we have as a society
Yeah.
is knocking somebody when they're just trying to do their best.
Right.
So
Mm,
that's where I feel like society has a lot of work to do,
yeah. For
because
sure.
we label individuals. And in labeling those individuals, we put them in a box.
Hmm.
And by putting them in the box, you make it difficult for them to want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Because if someone is, we've all been in sociology class at some point, at least many of us.
Right.
And if someone is seen and treated as if they're a bad student, oh, you're always late,
Yeah.
you're always this, you're always that, what's going to happen?
Right. They're going to become that. They're going to be that. Yeah.
So
Mm,
society has a lot to do with putting individuals who are trying to do their best
right.
in situations where it's like, why bother?
Right. Right.
Why do this if I'm just going to be treated like this? Why do this if I'm just going to be seen as a failure? Right?
So true.
So there's a lot that needs to be done to reduce the stigma, similar to the stigma of mental health, similar to the
Right.
stigma of substance use, similar to the stigma of individuals who are in sex work, right?
Right.
There's a lot
Right.
that needs to happen to reduce the stigma in order for us to understand
Yeah.
that this person is trying their best. Does that mean we should just not have our guard up whatsoever and just no?
Right.
But does that
Right.
mean you should knock the person down or continue to uplift them
Exactly.
so that they can continue to be on that right path?
So
Because at the
true.
end of the day, you don't want
Mm.
that person to give up, because giving up means that you have 5, 6, 7, 8 more individuals that are affected.
Right. Right. Ooh.
So it's worth it. It's worth having the conversation around reducing the stigma so that
Right.
we can then avoid the potential of other children being abused.
So true. Wow. I mean, this conversation alone is probably one of like, I've enjoyed all of this campaign, of course, but the perspective, and the metaphors and imagery that you provided throughout this conversation has been amazing. And, offline, I shared with you just my original struggle and wanting to dedicate an entire day of this campaign to focusing on the offenders because fear of not wanting to seem as if I was condoning their actions in any type of way. But I truly had to take a step back, breathe, release fear, and actually sit with myself and realize one, the many faces, of abusers, whether it's the fact that, they're a woman or they could be a man or a child, like we spoke of today, relative strangers. No matter, the face of the abuser, the fact remains the same that there are just as many abusers as there are survivors. And so, like you stated, we can't fully address the issue here without including and talking about and providing some type of empathy and healing for offenders and survivors. So I appreciate just you helping me address the elephant in the room, and us coming together to have this tough but necessary conversation. I feel like you provided a perspective that a whole lot of people probably wasn't ready to hear, but needed to hear for sure. But before you go, can you please tell everyone how they can keep in contact with you?
Yes, of course. It was such a pleasure. I just want to kind of just share that um, not everybody is willing and able to look at themselves in a mirror in a way
Yeah,
that they're able to see their darkness, right?
right, right.
And see their shadow, for lack of, it's a better term,
Oh, yeah.
that's able to see their shadow, right? And this
Mhm.
is an opportunity for us to normalize the talk around we all carry a shadow, right?
Right. So
And however
true.
that looks like, it's there
Yeah,
and it follows us everywhere. And rather
everywhere.
than, ignoring it and pretending like it's not there, it's important for us to talk about it in a way that we don't have to carry that guilt and shame anymore. So, what I want for survivors who also identify as abusers is for them
Yeah.
to no longer feel that shame and guilt as a
Mm,
result of them passing on a virus that they did not,
right.
you had no control over it. You were a child,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So, what happened after that, you don't need to hold on to, right?
Mm,
Whatever you need to do in order to tell your story, to share,
right.
if you want to apologize, if you want to connect to the person, whatever it takes, right? What it looks
Yeah,
different for different people,
right.
but you no longer have to hide that shadow.
So true.
It's so common that it's not even funny.
Right. Right.
So at this point, let's just talk about it,
Let's
right?
just talk
So that's
about
the
it.
first thing. Talk about it, let it go,
Exactly.
and move on, right? Don't hold on to that.
Right.
Don't live in bondage
Mm,
as a result of that, right?
right.
It's a virus. We in Corona. We pass it on from one person. The contact trace, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Let it go. One way or another, it's going to pass.
Yeah.
And if we happen to be a carrier of it and pass it on to somebody else, just see it
Yeah.
as a virus and name it and let it go,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then the message that I have for individuals that identify as offenders,
Hmm.
whether you were abused or not,
Yeah.
it's still a situation where you carry that same level of shame that I carry. You
Hmm.
carry that same level of guilt that I carry.
Yeah.
And it's okay to let that go. That baggage is heavy. That bondage is real. That jail cell
Mhm.
is heavy.
Yeah.
That sentence that you keep yourself under every day, it's very heavy and it's very real. It's
Mhm.
isolating.
Yeah.
And you don't have to live that way anymore. You could
Mm.
easily just open up that jail cell,
Yeah.
break that chain, break that bondage, and walk with that level of unconditional love
Mm.
that our Creator has for every single one of us.
Yeah.
Every single one of us are worthy of love. Just
Right.
off grid, we're all worthy of love. And it's just to let you know, it's like you too are worthy of love.
Mhm.
You too are worthy of forgiveness. It doesn't matter what you did. You are worthy of forgiveness. And that forgiveness is what is going to allow us to live a better tomorrow
Yeah.
and make a
So true.
difference together.
Mm.
Together, we can make a difference.
Right.
So, um, in terms of continuing the conversation with me further,
I
if
love
anybody
it.
wanted to stay in contact with me, my website is albasototlc.com. Um, and I also have my social media platforms, which is Alba Soto TLC, both on Facebook and Instagram. And I also have my podcast, which is Trauma Liberación con Alba Soto, which is a bilingual podcast that features um, podcasts from English and Spanish survivors who share their story in order to help liberate others. So
I love it. Thank you so, so much, Alba, for your time, your expertise. Everyone, please be sure to reshare this session. I already told y'all how empowering and enlightening it was alone. So, of course, you can also reshare any other session that you want throughout this campaign, and you will find the entire 5-day campaign and the multiple sessions that are being featured on each day, either on our Facebook, our YouTube, and our Instagram. And y'all, in all honesty, it's just really time that we begin to please ask. It's time that we begin to heal. And basically, it's just time that we all start having these tough conversations. So thank you so much for watching, and peace, everyone.